What is going on, everybody? Snack Packing here. Today I am going to run you through a couple of different things. So we're going to talk about two of the pages in Star Citizen's main menus, and that is going to be controls as well as keybinds. Now, if you're new to this game, this is going to be something could help you a lot because there's so many different options in these two pages that are A, unnecessary, B, optional, and C, required, right? So we're going to go through all of those and we're going to talk about which ones are important to have, which ones you might want to rebind, and then some other options that are just completely unnecessary and you can mostly ignore. So we're going to start off with the controls tab here. So the controls tab is going to be where you change options such as your mouse sensitivity, such as inversion settings, if you like any controls to be inverted, also sensitivity curves. Now, if you are only using a mouse and keyboard, this is really just going to be for mouse. If you are using joysticks or throttles or any other types of controls, such as a gamepad, you can choose down here to change these options on those as well. When you get into joysticks, you're going to be looking at a lot of different controls options, such as the dead zones on the various axes on your controls, saturation, which is basically going to be the percentage of the joystick range that the game is going to register. So for example, saturation on this axis is only going to be 75%, which means once the joystick moves 75% of its full range, it is going to register as 100% motion, right? So if I were to move the stick all the way to the right, by the time the stick gets to about 75% of its full range, it is going to be registering 100% full motion. So you can basically half your joystick's range if you'd like. If your joysticks have kind of a long swing to them, you can edit that here. They do also have inversion settings in here. So basically you can invert almost any axis that you want on here. We're not going to dive too much into inversion settings, but basically what you can do, and the most important ones that you're going to mess with if you do have joysticks, is going to be in flight and flight movement. Things such as your pitch, yaw, roll, your up and down strafe, which I have to have inverted on my sticks the way that I have them set up, left and right strafe, your forward and back throttle you might need to invert. And then anything down here, you're not really generally going to invert most of these things, but if you go and you set something to an axis and then you go and you test it out and you realize it's kind of doing the opposite of what you want it to do, this is where you go in order to invert that so that it does it the way you intend. Okay, so for mouse controls, we're basically going to be looking at just a few things here, right? So you have your basic mouse sensitivity. This coupled with your mouse's DPI is going to determine obviously the sensitivity of your mouse when you're looking around mostly in first person. ADS percentage you can edit in order to change the sensitivity, whether it's lower or higher whenever you ADS down a gun. ADS zoom scaling enabled, so this is basically going to be if you are zooming in with like a 4x scope or something bigger, do you want your ADS to be higher or lower scaled percentage wise for that, which can be very useful if you're sniping, etc. If you feel like you're zooming in and it's not sensitive enough or it's too sensitive, you can go over here and change the scaling of that particular option. As always, you always want to turn off mouse acceleration and mouse smoothing. Those are basically completely pointless. Okay, so moving on to key bindings. As you can see just from here, there is a lot of key bindings in this game. A lot of them are very optional. It basically gives you the ability to set up a full sim pit if you want to, so you can assign different things to different buttons and switches, etc. Keyboard controls, all of it's set up so that you can basically have a wide range of options if you want to have everything controllable physically. So we're going to go through here and I'm just going to focus on keyboard and mouse. Joysticks, you're basically going to have to figure out yourself what you like, right? Depending on what your setup is. So if you have a joystick and a throttle, if you have dual joysticks, if you have dual joysticks and a couple of control panels, it really depends on what your setup is. But you can still apply what I'm talking about here with the keyboard and mouse controls, and you can just basically transfer those over to a button that would be your preference, or any other type of input on your joysticks or your throttle or your control pad. You'll be able to see at least where to find that in this menu, because when we go into the menu here in the customization, you'll see just how many different options there are, and it can be a little difficult to find what you're looking for because there is no search option in Star Citizen's keybinds currently. So you're just going to go down here to Advanced Controls Customization, click on that, and this is where you're going to be able to change any key binding in the game. As you can see, it is quite a long list here. We are going to just basically go through each one, and I will tell you if it's an important one or not and kind of what it does. So starting with seats and operator modes, this is where you're going to do stuff like changing into nav mode or master mode. So you're going to switch between your scanning mode, your mining mode if you're in a mining ship, your salvage mode, the same idea if you're in a salvage ship like the Vulture. So one thing you'll learn by watching this video is there's a lot of key bindings inside of areas that don't necessarily make sense. I feel like sometimes they just get a new keybind and they just toss it into one of these without really thinking about what it is or where it should go. So for example, seats and operator modes has look behind in it, right? So I don't know why that's here, but it is. So basically what look behind is it's exactly what it sounds like. If you hit that button, it's going to have a camera that looks behind your ship. So it's kind of a reverse cam for your ship. So it is very useful. I do suggest binding it to something. I don't believe it has a default binding. I have mine on F3. That way you can kind of, if you're flying somewhere, you can look behind yourself really easily just by holding that button down. It does also have eject in here, so if you have a ship that you can eject out of, here's the key binding for that. Emergency exit seat, I am not even sure what that does, to be honest with you. I believe that is a default key binding that I have never used, so maybe it would mean you exit your seat faster. We can actually test that right now. Let's see what that does. Yeah, so it's not any faster. I'm not sure what the point of that binding is. Maybe they have a plan in the future to make it so that it's actually faster by hitting that key binding. I'm not sure, but there it is. So moving on, we have your mining and salvage operator modes, which are default to M. I haven't changed those. Those are pretty good key bindings. Basically, if you're inside of a mining ship, M will bring you into mining mode. If you're inside a salvage ship, M will bring you into salvage mode. And then there's a whole bunch of key bindings for those specifically. Scanning, I have it on V. That'll bring you into scan mode, so you can scan ships, scan cargo, scan various other things. And then the rest of these, I do not have a key binding for. One I do have here is next operator mode on button 3, which is my middle mouse click. And what that is going to do is basically cycle through the various modes. So let's go into SEM mode here, and it's going to basically cycle through. There's missile mode, there's scan mode, and then there is combat. So it just cycles through the 3 different modes just with one key binding. That way, if you don't want to have 3 separate key bindings for each of these, you can just have that one key binding and it will go through each one in succession, right? So boom, there you are, you're in missile mode, boom, there you go, you're in scam mode, and boom, you're back into regular combat mode. All right, so that's going to be pretty much it for seats and operator modes. I do have a key binding in here for enter remote turret 1, 2, and 3. I have it all on F10 for me. It doesn't always work, but if you want to set that to something, you can do that. Sometimes it'll let you just jump right into a remote turret without having to physically find the remote turret button that is usually on the consoles for remote turrets. So that can be a useful one when it does work. All right, moving on to cockpit. This one has a few pretty important ones in it. This is going to be, things that you can do in your ship, such as unlocking your doors, opening and closing your doors, flight ready, etc. So starting with self-destruct is going to be the same button as basically self-destructing yourself in the game. It is the same for the ship. If you hit self-destruct backspace, it does give you a timer, so it's not going to instantly blow you up. And it is toggleable, so you can turn it on and then turn it off if you realized you hit it by accident. But if you do want to self-destruct your ship, there it is. Cooler rate, don't mess with it. Light ready is a very important one. I believe default is Alt-R. I have changed mine to what it used to be, which is just tapping R. Basically, if your ship is completely turned off, you can hit R. It'll turn on all of the systems. It will close any open doors that there are, and it'll basically make your ship flight ready. So that is a very important one. If you'd like to set that to something, whether it be a button or a key binding, R is what I use. Now, opening and closing doors is also a very important one. I have it on minus on my keyboard, so you can just tap that and it'll open or close all of the doors on your ship. Useful for opening, basically opening doors. So you can put a ramp down, you can open it from your cockpit. That way, if someone's trying to enter your ship or someone's trying to load a vehicle into your ship or some cargo, you can just tap that button and open everything up. You can just leave it on toggle. That way you can hit it whether to open or close. They do, like I said, there are a lot of options in here that are basically set up so that if you wanted a separate switch on something like a control panel, like you wanted flipping a switch up to be opening all your doors and then flipping a switch down to be closing all your doors. That's why we see so many key bindings in here that seem like they would be redundant, is so that people can set up that type of stuff. So you can leave it on toggle if you're doing mouse and keyboard. That way you just tap it and it'll do one or the other. Same goes with locking and unlocking your doors. I have it on the equal sign on my keyboard, and that is basically going to do what it sounds like. It's going to unlock all of your doors or lock it. By default, your ships are locked so that only people that are within your party can open a door, call an elevator, whatever it might be, unless they break in. You can actually unlock your ship so that anybody, even people outside of your party, can go and open up a ramp and get into your ship without being in your party. So be careful with that. You don't ever want to just run around with your ship unlocked, because people will board you or steal your ship or do whatever. Port toggle all is going to be one that is going to enable the ability to remove components and weapons from your ship. If your ports are locked, you will not be able to take a tractor beam and remove something like a laser repeater from your ship, like pull it off and then put something else onto it. So if you plan on doing anything like that, this is going to be more important in the future whenever we have to do things in engineering, such as replacing components. But it's also useful if you find a ship, maybe a ship that you destroy that has some weapons on it that you want. You can actually unlock your ports on your ship, and then you can go and remove the guns from that ship that you destroyed, take them off, and then you can put them on your ship if they're the correct size and they would fit on your ship. Also important to have this so that you can unlock the ports on the ship you're trying to remove the weapons from that you want. So put that on something. I have mine on backslash, which is just under the backspace button on my keyboard. So the multifunction displays menu really doesn't have a whole lot that I personally use. I believe they've added a lot of stuff to this recently, but it's really going to be more for people that are doing SimPit setups and other things like that. Really the only thing they have in here by default, I believe, is these right here, where you can cycle a page forward and backward. And then you have to basically choose which MFD you want to select. So I believe there's going to be a lot more added to this once they do more with the MFDs that they updated recently. But I wouldn't worry too much about this one. If you'd like to mess with it yourself, go for it. But I don't believe there's a whole lot in there to use at the moment. All right, so vehicles view is going to have a bunch of camera related options and basically just looking around, etc. So you have look left, right, up, and down on your mouse axis. Cycle camera view is going to be so you can go between first and third person. In your ship view, which you see me use all the time, you can basically go into third person. You can free look in third person and look around your ship, etc., change the camera, all that good stuff. I am not 100% sure. I've never figured out what cycle camera orbit mode does. If you're in camera view, in any camera view, and you hit F5, it doesn't do anything. So I am not entirely sure what that's for. But that is defaulted to F5. You might want to unbind that and use F5 for something else. F5 is a great key binding and a nice open one you can use for anything else. Zooming in and out on your mouse wheel, free look. If you'd like to change away from holding Z for free look, you can change that to something else. I do have it left on default Z. Dynamic zoom in and out is left, up, and down arrow. Basically what that is going to do is zoom you in and out, right? So you'll hold left alt and you can zoom in and out just like that. Okay, and last but not least, for vehicle view, you're going to have what is called precision mode, which is a new basically zoom in precise targeting mode in your ship. Default, it should be button 2 on your mouse, which is right click. And then if you hold it, it is a zoom. And then you have cycle tracking right here, which is alt right click as well. So for example, this is what it looks like. If you're in your ship, you can right click, takes you into precision mode, and then you can hold it down and you will be in zoom, right? If you have gimbals on your guns on your ship, you can actually target them that way by holding down Z while you're in gimbal mode, etc. So very useful, especially if you're maybe shooting at something that's on the ground or something that's far away, etc. You can use this to be a little more precise in your targeting. All right, that's going to be it for vehicles view. Now, flight movement is probably one of the most important ones in here. They seem to take any new key binding and toss it into flight movement. It's going to have everything related to flight movement, and it's going to have a lot of ship-related things in it as well that aren't even related to movement. So right here is where you would set up something like your pitch, your yaw, your roll. All of that is going to be on here. These are keyboard controls, so your pitch and your yaw are going to be controlled by your mouse. Q and E for your roll left and right. Spacebar is going to go up strafe, left control for down strafe, and then you're going to have throttle increase and decrease on W and S, and then your left and right strafe on A and D. This is where you're going to go if you're on your joystick options to set up your joystick for flight movement, but you can basically reference the keyboard bindings and then just set them to either an axis or a button on your joystick or your throttle. That way you can understand, you know, this is what the control is, and I just need to bind it to something on my joysticks. Now, something that they've recently replaced is what you might call cruise control. Cruise control used to be very simpler, where you'd basically just hit C or whatever button it was, and it would just set your speed to what you had it at, and you would just keep going, right? It was just like cruise control in your car. You just hit the button, and it just keeps you going. Now they have something called cruise mode, which is a little bit different. So basically how it works now is you do have to be in coupled mode. So as you can see over here, I am in coupled mode. You can toggle that on or off. And as long as you're in coupled mode, you can hit Alt-C, and you'll see right here on this throttle indicator, there is a C on there now, and it'll tell you what velocity that it is set at. So it's similar to cruise control mode, but I would call it more like a sticky throttle mode than a cruise control mode now. Basically, if I accelerate, I can change that number up and down, and it's basically like a sticky throttle. So if I have it off, see how it's only when I'm holding down the button is whenever it accelerates or decelerates. If I have cruise mode on, I can basically set it to a certain number, and it just cruises at that number. You do have to be careful with this, because if you're trying to approach something to land, or you're not meaning to have sticky throttle, and you forget to turn this off, it can cause an issue, and you'll be wondering why you can't stop your ship, and it'll throw you off, and you might run into something. So be careful with this. And when you use it, it's very useful if you want to just kind of set a speed and say you don't have a throttle, you're just using keyboard mouse. You can actually use this as kind of a sticky throttle. So that is what that does. All right, so that's cruise mode toggling. You can basically ignore all of this right here. I wouldn't even mess with trim, wouldn't mess with any of that stuff. Down here, you're gonna have your decoupled mode toggle. I have that on caps lock. That's basically to, you know, toggle between coupled and decoupled. Boost, left shift, pretty self-explanatory. Speed limiter is exactly what it sounds like. You can basically cap your speed to whatever number you want it to be. I have mine set to comma on the keyboard, and then to go up or down on the speed limiter. To set it higher or lower, I have it on mouse wheel up and down, plus left alt. So for example here, it's pretty self-explanatory, but say you wanted to cap your ship to 50 meters per second. So you just toggle on the speed limiter. You'll see right here, this little line pops up. That is your speed limiter. This is your velocity bar, and you can edit how you want it, right? So it depends on what mode you're in. If you're in nav mode, the maximum speed is going to be a lot higher. This ship has a pretty low speed limit on SCM mode. So say if I wanted to limit it to 31, I can't go any higher than 31. So it is exactly how it sounds. It can enable kind of some precision flying. It can make it so maybe you want it so that you're not going to go any faster than 500, whatever it might be. And it's going to basically make it so you can't go any faster than whatever you set it at. All right, so acceleration limiter, I wouldn't really mess with. I never mess with acceleration limiter. It's kind of the same thing. It's just going to limit the G's in which you can accelerate the ship. I don't know when that would really be useful for the most part. I've never used it, so I wouldn't mess with it too much. Space brake is going to be whatever you want it to be. Default is X. That is what I keep it on, and it is exactly what it sounds like. It's going to put your ship to a stop. It is a space break. All right, so this one right here, this is a very important one to completely get rid of. Just completely get rid of this one right here. Just unbind it by right-clicking on it and never go back. You do not need this. It is very annoying because it turns itself off randomly whenever you're just typing. So if you use left shift, or I'm sorry, right shift at any point, it turns this on. And basically what it does, I'll show you what it does just for the sake of it. It's extremely annoying. So you see how you use your mouse to pitch and yaw, right? If I hit that, it locks it. The ship won't pitch or yaw anymore. I don't understand a use case where you would ever need to do that, but that's what it does, and it turns itself on by itself all the time. So go ahead and unbind that so you don't accidentally hit that. All right, so you do have G-force safety on-off toggle if you'd like to set something for that to turn on and off your G-force safety. You do have ESP toggle off and on. You're probably not going to mess with this too much. Some PvPers do toggle ESP on and off. I won't go into the details of what ESP is right now, but if you learn what ESP is and you want to toggle it on and off, you can set a key binding right there. Landing system is just going to be your landing gear. It's going to be a toggle. Default is N, so you can leave it on that, or you can change it to something else, but that's just going to be to deploy or retract your landing gear. You do also have VTOL. Not every ship has VTOL, but some do, and it basically either adds thrusters or rotates thrusters in order to give you more vertical thrust. So you have a key binding for that. That is an important one to have because various ships that do have it, it can be very useful to use on those. Cycle configuration, I'm not going to be able to show you with this ship, but think of something like the Scorpius. If you're familiar with the Scorpius is a good example. The Scorpius can basically retract its wings, so it can kind of go out into a configuration that looks like an X-wing, or it can bring the wings back and retract them whenever it goes into landing mode. So any ship that basically has multiple physical configurations to it, whether it be expanding out the wings or transforming in some way or another, this is basically going to cycle that on and off. It's basically a toggle. So I have it on left Alt K. You can set it to whatever you want. But if you do have a ship that has those type of configurations, it's a very useful thing to have. Auto land is interesting. You can actually use auto land in this game, and it actually does work most of the time. Basically, if you are hovering over, say, the pad in your hangar. Now, I haven't done this in a while, and I haven't done it since they've edited the hangars to where there's actually a hangar elevator in there. So I don't know if this still works or not. But before, you could basically hover over a pad, and then you could hold down N, and it would basically land the ship for you. Once you get good enough at it, then you're basically going to do it yourself because this just takes too long. But this is also useful if you're going to dock something like a Polaris to a docking port. You just have to get close enough, hold down N, and then it'll basically auto dock for you. Request landing is going to be something you use all the time. This is going to be a key binding that you're going to use in order to call the ATC to land in a station, to land in a city, any place that you're going to be assigned a hangar. This is where you do that. I have mine set to apostrophe on my keyboard. I normally use it on my joystick. Default is Alt N, I believe. So your default might look a little bit different, but you can change it here. Whatever you want to use to call ATC, this is what you want to set that to. They do also have request cargo loading, which is generally only going to be used on something like a Hull C, which requires external loading of its cargo because of the way the ship is set up. It can't load cargo while it's landed, so it has to be in space to get loaded. So there's specific locations at a space station where you basically pull your Hull C into, and then the ship loads up the cargo for you. And then this is the key binding to request that loading. Cycle master modes, you're going to use this one as well all the time. B is what I have mine set to on short press. That way I tap B and I swap between SCM mode and nav mode to quantum. You can change it to whatever you want as well. All right, so jump drive, request jump. Basically, this is going to be the same thing as activating your quantum drive, but this one is specifically referring to jumping through the gateway to go from something like Stanton to Pyro, to go through that big wormhole. is what this jump is referring to. So this is just saying once you've basically calibrated to the jump, you left click, and that's whenever it will either send you into the hole or open up the jump gate for you. So you can set that to whatever you want. You can leave it on button 1. That way you just left click. Super simple. Doesn't interfere with anything else. Gravity compensation and automatic precision mode toggle. These are not defaulted. I put them on my number pad along with right control, but you can basically just go into your game settings over here and have these set up as a default option to where it's either always on or it's always off, depending on what you like, right? I would usually suggest to just keep gravity compensation on. There's not a whole lot of reasons to have it turned off, but I have mine set up as a toggle just in case. And then precision mode is another one. I have mine off, but if you're a new player, you might want to have it on. Like I said, it's also in game settings, which I covered in another video. But basically what that does is just turns on precision mode when you're landing and limits the speed of your ship so you can land more precisely. They do also have some options for proximity assist toggle, which I would suggest always having off. And then they do have advanced HUD toggle as well if you want to toggle between the regular and advanced HUD, which I can show you right here what it looks like. This is the new advanced HUD, which puts everything right up here. If I drop out into nav mode, I actually have it set up so that it's not an advanced HUD mode, which basically puts everything more down in this area. Advanced mode basically looks the same no matter what ship you're in, but the non-advanced mode, the regular HUD, can vary ship to ship. Where all this various information can vary in different ships. So this one can be a little bit confusing if you're changing ships all the time, because you're not sure where to find the coupled indicator, or you're not sure where to see your VTOL or your landing gear indicator, depending on what ship you're in. But if you are on the advanced HUD, if you hit the landing gear, it's always going to show your landing gear right here on this icon. It's always going to have coupled over here, ESP, various other things are basically always going to be in the same place on the advanced HUD. So it's a lot more unified. All right, moving on to quantum travel is just going to be one button. This is going to be to engage your quantum drive. So if you calibrate to a location to jump to it, this is the button you're going to hit in order to activate the jump and jump to that location. And it is as a hold down and not just a click. All right, now docking mode, this is going to be for large ships that use docking ports such as the Polaris, large ships like that. It's going to be the same as your landing button, your landing gear button. So basically to toggle docking mode, you hit N, to invoke docking, N as well. And then there is a docking camera, which is O. Okay, so the next two sections are going to be related to targeting and target cycling. I'm not sure why they didn't bring these all into one section, but they are separate. So let's kind of go over them real quick. Let's skip over targeting real quick and let's go to target cycling. Target cycling is going to be actually locking onto a target. So you're in combat and you want to lock onto the target that is in front of you. Under reticle is referring to the middle reticle in your screen. I have mine set to tab. So this is basically going to target whatever ship is in front of you underneath your reticle, right? And then you do also have all of these different options to cycle between different ones forward and backwards. You can cycle attackers forwards and backwards. You can cycle hostiles forwards and backwards, friendlies, or you can cycle all. You can even cycle sub-targets as well. But I basically, if I'm using keyboard and mouse, I don't generally use keyboard and mouse for whenever I'm in combat, but under reticle is going to be the most important one in order to target whatever's in front of you, whatever you're looking at. Now, when you go back up here to targeting, it's a little bit different because they have a new key binding for auto targeting, which is basically when you look at a target, it'll automatically lock onto it. That can be good and bad depending on the situation, especially if you're using missiles. But they do have a toggle now, which is T. You basically long press T, hold it down, it'll toggle it on and off. They don't have an indicator on the HUD to tell you whether this is on and off, not that I've been able to find. So you don't really know if it's on or off, but they do have a toggle for that auto lock and unlock. They do have pinning targets in this game as well, which basically, think of it like a squad leader can basically pin a target, and then that target will have like a number 1 on it, and they can say, okay, let's attack number 1 first, and then, or, oh, let's focus on number 2. So they can pin a target with a number on it to basically mark a target with an indicator, and then, coordinate an attack on that target. Remove all pinned targets here, lock selected target here, unlock current target is the next one. So if you are locked onto something and you want to unlock it, hold left alt, hit T, it'll unlock it for you. I believe default for targeting is T, and then unlocking is alt T. So those are the two main ones, right? You want to be able to target with T, and you want to be able to untarget with left alt T. And then you have enable, disable, look ahead, which I'm not going to go in too much detail about look ahead, but basically what it does is it moves the camera for you to look at your target. So as your target is flying around you, it kind of follows it a little bit. So as you're turning, trying to follow it, it takes the camera and looks ahead toward your target as you're flying. So some people like it, some people don't, but it's one of those things that you can mess with as well. Oh, and then you do have auto zoom on selected target on off. It will zoom your camera into your target for you automatically. If you don't like that, there is an option in game settings to turn it on and off, but this is your toggle for that. All right, so that's going to be everything for targeting. Target hailing, you're not really going to use very often. Hail target is basically to call them on the comms, and what that does is you can actually use like face over IP or whatever with your webcam and have a conversation with somebody over the ship's MFD. So it's actually a really cool idea, but you're probably not going to use it too often, but you can kind of goof around and like call your friend and have a conversation with them in game. I'm not sure how well it's working right now, but that's basically what that is. It's kind of like calling someone's ship's cell phone, or you can actually call them through their mobi-glass as well, and it'll work the same way. It'll actually have a camera pointing at their face, and you can have a full-on conversation with somebody. So that's what target hailing is. Okay, moving on to flight radar. This is basically activate ping. I'll show you right here what that looks like. There it is right there. So a ping is basically a scan that's sent out to look for targets in front of you, to look for mining nodes on the ground, look for mining nodes in space, salvage nodes in space. It's basically a ping that will highlight objects in a certain range of you depending on your radar capabilities. That way you can find ships, and you can find all of those items. So that's a very important one to have. It is probably not defaulted to T the way mine is. So if you want to go and look and see what the default is for this, it might be tab. I'm not 100% sure. I don't remember, but make sure that is binded to something and you know what it is, because pinging is very useful. Okay, so vehicle scanning. Scanning is, remember we saw up above in the operator modes, V is to turn on your scanning mode. Once you're in scanning mode, then basically you just hold left click in order to start a scan on whatever you're pointing at. You'll see on the HUD, it'll highlight a ship with an outline whenever you're going to scan it. And then you do also have scanning angles, which are useful for things such as mining, etc. I'm not sure where that is right now in the game, because they have kind of changed this a bit recently. But before, you could increase or decrease scanning angles to kind of narrow the angle that you're scanning and get more detail from your scan from further distances and stuff like that. But this is where all of that is. Okay, so mining, pretty basic. You're going to need to grab a mining ship in order to learn this stuff, but firing mining laser, left click, alt left click to switch the mining laser, which is basically going to switch it from like the mining laser to the gathering laser, increasing power, and then activating various modules. Jettison cargo only works in mining ships, really. You can't like jettison cargo in a normal ship. You can't, yeet boxes out of your cargo hold. This is really just to jettison things that you've been mining inside of a mining ship. So basically mining materials go inside of the little pods on the mining ships, and then you take that to a refinery in order to refine the material. This is to jettison that stuff. Salvage, same idea. All of this stuff, these are mostly defaults here. Changing over to gimbal mode. But here's all the salvage key bindings. I'm not going to go through all of them. You're just going to have things such as increasing and decreasing tractor beam distance. In salvage ships, you can actually change between your left and right modules individually, and that's what these are. There's a fracture and disintegrate mode as well, so you toggle between those. You can change the beam spacing right here. You can focus different salvage heads. There's a lot of different things you can do in salvage. It's not as complicated as it sounds, But this is basically the section where you're going to find all of those key bindings if you want to map them to something else or see what's what when you're going to salvage, which there's a lot of salvage guides out there, which I'm sure they go into more detail about that. So turret movement is going to be very similar to flight movement in that it's going to have pitch and yaw, which is going to use your mouse X and Y, just like flying. So it's going to be very similar in that aspect, but there's a few key bindings for a turret that are very useful. So toggling turret mouse movement between VJoy and FPS style, that is basically going to be, what I'll say is VJoy is this, right? So whenever you move out, it's kind of like a joystick. It's a virtual joystick. So there's this movement to where if I put my mouse over here, it's going to keep on going and it's not going to stop. Whereas, here, let me move over to a turret. Okay, so VJoy is basically going to be, I put my mouse over here and the turret just continues to rotate until I move my mouse back to the center, right? Move it over here, it's going to keep moving until I move it back to the center. That way, if you need to like turn around, you can just hold it and then you can stop. If you're like me, I prefer kind of a more FPS style aiming. So if you hit Q, it's basically going to bring it to more of like a point and click mode, right? So you're going to have to move the mouse a little bit more. I actually have my mouse set up to where I can raise my DPI to make this move a little bit faster. Just depending on the turret, some turrets are slower than other ones. So some turrets you might want to use VJoy instead because you can actually go quite a bit faster. It's just kind of what you're used to, right? If you're using a mouse, if you're used to VJoy, a lot of people use this. It's very good and can let you aim very well. But if you need to precisely aim, or you're in this mode right here and you want to point a little more precisely, you can hit Q and it'll basically take it out of that VJoy mode and make it more of like your traditional moving your mouse to aim. Okay. Remember earlier I had enter remote turret. I do also have exit remote turret set to F10 here. There's a few ways you can exit a remote turret. You can hit Y as well, which is your exit seat button, and it'll take you out of the remote turret without making you exit the seat. But if you want to have a dedicated button to it, there you go. All right, now turret gyro stabilization toggle is defaulted to E. Basically what that does is it disconnect the turret movement from the ship movement. So if the ship is turning a whole bunch, the turret is not going to move with it. The turret is going to have its own gyro stabilization and keep pointing in whatever direction it was pointing instead of moving with the ship. So you can turn that on and off depending on the situation. And then if there's multiple remote turrets attached to one console, you can swap between them with A and D as well. Now in Turret Advanced, it's going to just have a few other options as well. I'm not sure why these are advanced options and they couldn't just put it in turret movement, but you have recenter turret, which is pretty self-explanatory. It's going to recenter the turret to whatever the default position is. In this case, this one is pointing towards the center front of the ship. Some of them might be pointing towards the back of the ship, depending on what it is. But if you need to quickly recenter the turret back to the front, you can do that just by holding down C. They do also have a turret speed limiter. I wouldn't really mess with that. I never mess with that personally. But they do have the option as well for our turret speed limiter. You can increase and decrease the turret speed, all that kind of stuff. But it's going to be defaulted to the maximum speed, so I wouldn't mess with it. Some ships, such as the Scorpius and a few other ones, do have a different positions that the turret can be at. So it has a track that the turret moves along, and it can actually shift, such as the Scorpius can change from being on top of the ship or go down to the bottom rear of the ship. That default is going to be S. Be careful not to accidentally hit that, because then it takes a few seconds for the turret to reposition. So if you're in the middle of a fight, you don't want to accidentally do that. So you may want to rebind that to something else if you feel like you might accidentally hit S as well. There is cycling fire mode. This isn't going to be super useful right now. It is relatively bugged, but generally speaking, when you fire a turret, you'll notice it more with something like laser cannons, where it just fires kind of, one every second, like boom, boom, boom. It'll stagger it out instead, and it'll shoot left, right, left, right, left, right, left, right to have more like of a steady stream of fire. It's not really super noticeable on something like repeaters like this because the rate of fire is already so high. But if you're on something like cannons, so you see in cannons, it's boom, 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 boom. If you do staggered fire, it staggers them out, so it's more of a steady stream. One other thing about staggered fire is it will make your ammo counts be a little janky, right? At least whenever you're not in staggered fire, you're shooting one at a time. and they all recharge at the same time. When you're in staggered fire, they're all just kind of in different, different charge states. So something to keep in mind. All right, so that's it for turrets. Vehicle weapons is going to be very similar. You have cycle gimbal with G. You have stagger, just like we were talking about. I have mine set to slash here. You can toggle lead and lag pips. You can change different pip options here, which are also available in your MFDs, and other various options. I haven't really messed with stuff like gunnery UI magnification. I'm not sure what that does, to be honest with you. Okay, so gunnery UI magnification, I would call it kind of an accessibility option, I suppose. It's not something that I really use often, but if you want, it just kind of makes your targeting reticle a little bit bigger. So I guess it's just more visible. You see how just hitting the button just kind of makes it bigger and smaller. So that's what that one does. Okay, and then down here, you're going to have manual convergence distance. Now, manual convergence distance is basically going to be, you can set the distance at which your guns converge on each other. So, for example, if you have 4 laser cannons all shooting forward, they basically shoot at an angle to hit a center point in front of you, and you can change that distance if you like. There's also a setting in the game settings where you can change that specific distance, but right here you can actually increase or decrease it on the fly for that convergence distance. Okay, then you have weapon preset. Default, you're just going to be left mouse button is going to fire all of your guns, but if you're using other controls, you can actually separate it so that you can fire different fire groups with different buttons. Similar to if you have a joystick, some joysticks have a dual stage trigger to where you pull it a little bit and it'll fire one, and then you pull it all the way back and it'll fire group 2. That's how I have my joystick set up. But with a mouse and keyboard, you're basically just going to be left clicking in order to fire everything. But this is where you can set that up if you have different fire groups as well. Mouse wheel up and down will change between those different fire groups. So on your MFD weapon config here, you can actually set your fire groups right over here. So you're going to have group 1, group 2, group 3, group 4, etc. And you can actually change which guns are set on each group. That way, if I just wanted these 2 to be on group 1 and these 2 to be on group 2, you can actually set that as well. Okay, so I have it on group 1 right now, which means if I fire, it's only going to fire those 2 cannons. If I move it to group 2, it's only going to fire those 2 cannons. And then if I move it to group 3, it'll fire all 3 cannons. So that is what setting fire groups are. Oh, look at that. We have security visiting us. Yeah, so that's Blackjack Security. That's an ArcCorp security ship. All right, so you can change all those presets here. And if you'd like to set different bindings to different fire groups, you can do that as well. But weapon preset fire will fire whatever group you have it on in your MFD. And then they do have various other options here. Scenting quantum jammers and quantum snares, QIDs, EMPs, all of that stuff you can actually set key bindings for as well. In vehicle missiles, launch missiles is going to be left mouse click as usual. You can also change it to holding a button instead of tapping a button if you'd rather. Instead of left clicking, you can hold left click if you'd like. Cycling missile types, mouse wheel up and down, is basically some ships have multiple missile loadouts, so they might have some EM missiles and some thermal infrared missiles. You can actually cycle between the 2 different missiles here to choose what you want to load up. Increasing number of armed missiles. Various ships have various number of maximum missiles you can arm at one time. Most ships are going to have a maximum of 4, but some ships, such as the Saber Firebird, can load up to 6. And then you have some ground missile boats that can actually load even more than that at one time. But this is where you increase that number. For example, I don't want to target that guy with a missile, but if we go into missile mode here, they've got some work they need to do on the missile HUD. But up here on the top left is really kind of the main place you're going to look for what missiles you have, the number of missiles that you have. It might show Thunderbolt 3 and then whatever other type of missile as well if you have multiple different ones. But you can basically hit G in order to increase the number of missiles that are loaded. For this ship, it's up to 4. And then if you do Alt-G, you can reset it back to 1. and then tap G to increase it to 2. Maybe you just want to do 2 missiles. Maybe you want to do 3 missiles, whatever it might be. That is how you cycle between how many missiles you arm. If I had other types of missiles to cycle between, I would just mouse wheel up or down in order to change which missile I want to arm. Okay, they do also have an option here for bombs, such as for the A1 and A2. You can toggle desired impact point. Basically what that does is there is a circle that will show up where a bomb's impact point should be, and you can actually lock that impact point with this option right here, and it just makes bombing a little bit easier. And then there's a few other options here for bombs as well for the HUD. And then you have enable cinematic camera, and what that does is it actually has a camera that will follow the missile for you. So let me fire a missile here. And then you can hold that key binding and get a little missile tracking camera with it. So that's pretty cool. You can do that with bombs, and you can do that with missiles as well. You can't control where the missiles and stuff are going, but it's kind of a neat little thing they have in the game for those. If you want to follow that missile as it goes to its target, it can be pretty cool to do that for videos if you're doing like a torpedo, stuff like that. All right, moving on to shields and countermeasures. This is another pretty important one. Decoy, launch, burst, set, and launch burst are going to be your main one for firing off your decoys. Basically what this does is it'll fire one burst if you tap it. If you hold it, it'll set and launch a larger burst. So let me show you what that looks like. On the screen here, you see the number of decoys your ship has and how many decoys are loaded right here. If I hit H, it's going to fire off one decoy, or one set of decoys rather. The number of decoys that actually come out are going to vary by the size of the ship. It's designed to mask the signature of the ship and obviously attract missiles away from your ship. So the number of decoys that fire off are going to be dependent on how large your ship is, but you can actually hold down the button in order to fire off more. So you see over there, it's increasing the number of decoys that it's going to fire at one time. You can actually keep on going and fire off quite a few. So you can literally fire off 20 at one time and do kind of a panic fire. Or you can actually increase or decrease the size of the burst before you fire them, so without holding it down, by either using left or right alt and then hitting H as well. So right alt H to increase it, you see the number going up 2, 3, 4, etc. Or lower it with left alt H back down to whatever you want it to be. That way then if you just tap it, it'll fire off the preset amount that you have. So they do also have something called panic launch, and it is exactly what it sounds like. It's just going to fire off a whole crap load of them right there. You see it just automatically fired off 25 decoys. So it is exactly what it sounds like. It is a panic launch of your decoys. And then last but not least, you do have your noise. Noise is something that kind of masks your entire ship signature so that you can't be targeted. So if someone is targeting your ship, and you want to just deploy some noise so that they lose target briefly, you can hit J and it's going to fire out something called noise, which is going to create like a little bit of an EM cloud around you, which is going to prevent ships from being able to target you. It's going to mask your ship's signature temporarily. Now the cloud does remain static, so once you move out of that cloud, then you're going to be targetable again, and of course it is temporary, it's not permanent. So it does go away after a few seconds, and then you'll be targetable again. But it's really nice for if you're being targeted by something, you can deploy some noise, and it's a good way to try and get away without them being able to automatically target you and aim at you, or even target you to fire missiles at you. So that can be a very useful thing. Don't forget about your noise. Both of these are extremely important. Missiles are extremely strong right now, so you're going to want to have it in your mind what your decoy buttons are and what your noise buttons are. They do also have options here for your shields. Some ships have the ability to raise individual shield facings separately, so you can actually put more power to your front shield versus your back shield, or your left shield versus your right shield, top, bottom, etc. Now, not every shield or not every ship has the ability to do this with their shields. Some smaller ships generally have one shield generator which covers all shield facings. It's called a bubble shield. So one shield generator is covering the entire ship, so you can't increase or decrease power to one or the other. But some ships you are able to do that. I'm not sure what the state of that is now with the new MFDs and some of the other changes they've made. But if that ever does come back, or it is still a thing, you can change the power level of individual shield facings if you'd like here. All right, so flight power is going to have some pretty important options in it. It's going to have some key bindings to toggle various components in your ship, as well as doing things such as increasing your shield power, your engine power, your weapon power, etc. So basic defaults is going to be to toggle power on and off, which is going to turn off everything, including your engines, including your shields and your weapons, is U. Individually, you're going to have I for just your engines, you're going to have O for just your shields, or you're going to have P for just your weapons. And down here is where you're basically going to attribute your power output in your ship. So if you'd like to put more power to your engines, you can hit F6 to increase the power going to your engines, or decrease it with Alt F6, or you can hold it down to set max power to engines, and I'll show you what this does in a moment. But you can do the same with shields and weapons, or you can reset the assignments back to the default with F8. Okay, so flight HUD is just going to be extremely simple. I don't even know why this is here. I feel like it doesn't need its own section. Alas, I digress. Open your mobiGlass F1, pretty simple. Scoreboard if you're an Arena Commander. F2 to go straight to your map. And then wiping your helmet visor. No idea why that's in this section, but it is left Alt X. Okay. Lights, pretty much the only thing you're going to use there is to toggle your headlights with L. You can change that key binding. There it is. Vehicle mobiGlass doesn't even have anything. Stopwatch, wouldn't really mess with it. It's really for racing. If you want to mess with it, there it is. On foot all is going to have all of your FPS commands, so your movement, your jumping, your crouching, your proning, sprint, walking, leaning, ledge grab, firearm attack, which is left click, melee attacking. You can actually do left and right melee attack if you're punching with your fists, etc. You can left or right click to punch with left fist or right fist. You can hold it down to do a heavy melee attack with your fist whenever you're boxing people. You can actually block by holding both of these buttons. Med pen, inject other. If you pull out a med pen and you're trying to heal your buddy, don't left click. Make sure you right click, because that's what the button is. If you hit left click, you're going to end up healing yourself by accident. Dodge left, right, and back doesn't do anything. I'm not sure if that's going to be a Squadron 42 thing or not, but there is no dodging in this as far as I'm aware. And then just basically anything you want to change in here, just kind of look through here and look what you have. Aim down sight, right click, obviously. If you're throwing a grenade, it's going to be left and right click to throw over arm or under arm. Interact with scope is going to be, there are certain scopes that have like a different scoping mode in it. So if you are aiming down sight and you have like a 4x, you can tap shift and sometimes it'll zoom in a little bit more. Sometimes it turns on like a night vision on that scope, etc., etc. Weapon stance toggle is basically going to be to hold your gun at a lowered position compared to having it up and ready to fire. Then you have your various options here to select your different weapons and gadgets, primary, secondary, and sidearm. You can change that if you'd like. If you'd rather your sidearm be on number 1 and then your secondary or your primary be on 2, you can change that if you'd like. Melee, gadget, unarmed. You're going to have a reload. You have ammo repooling, which doesn't really work right now. Reload secondary. This is basically backpack reloading. So if you have ammo in your backpack you like to reload from, you can try and do that. Holstering your weapon is going to be a hold. I don't know why it doesn't say that here. But in order to holster your weapon, you just hold down R instead of tapping it for reload. Hold it and it'll holster it or bring it out from holster. You can set a drop item button. I have mine set on delete. So if you're holding something in your hand and you want to drop it, you can just tap that and it will drop it. Customize weapon will bring up your weapon customization options. It's a little janky right now, but if you'd like to use it, you can actually put on attachments, remove attachments, and all that from your weapons by using that. They do have a holding your breath for sniping in here. If you have a underbarrel attachment, such as a laser or an underbarrel flashlight, U is to turn that on and off. You do have fire modes for semi-automatic. Some laser weapons have a charging function. You can change that fire mode there. You do have weapon zeroing with page up and page down. And then you have your movement, default movement speed increase and decrease on your mouse wheel. This basically, if you find yourself walking at some point when you should be moving faster, just use your mouse wheel, scroll up, and your movement speed should increase your walking speed there. Request rescue while incapped. It'll basically show you on the screen. You can hit M to put out a medical rescue beacon. Those aren't working right now in 4.0, so I wouldn't bother. But when they do work, it'll put out a medical beacon at a default medical beacon amount of money reward, and you can actually have a player attempt to grab that beacon and come rescue you. So those can be pretty cool when they do work. Flashlight or torch for T. Again, wiping your helmet visor is in here, even though we saw it up on Flight HUD. It is also down here for some reason, left Alt X. Same as your ship, you do have F4 to go between first and third person. Free view camera hold, basically free look, Z as well, just like in your ship. Okay, zooming out and in reference to this is basically saying if you hold F4 and then mouse wheel, you can zoom in and out in your third person camera. Mobi-glass again, F1, scoreboard again, for some reason is F6 here. Firearm attack, left click, map again, F2. Force respawn, which is basically unalive yourself to respawn, is backspace. It is a hold, it is not just a tap, so you do hold it. And then you have rolling while prone, you have tractor beam, increase and decrease distance if you're using a multi-tool, that's your mouse wheel. And then again, regenning while you're incapacitated, you can also hold backspace to do that, and it will respawn you. EVA is pretty self-explanatory. It's just moving around with your mouse, rolling, strafing, and all of that. It is very similar. It uses a space brake similar to your ship, boosting with shift. Free look is the same, and then strafing. It's very similar controls to your ship as well. Okay, and then you do have 0G traversal. This isn't quite a thing yet. You cannot attach to surfaces at this time. That is something they're working on adding in, where you can basically grab a surface and attach to it, and then you can launch away from that surface, etc. So look forward to that, but this is where some of those options are. Ground vehicle, very similar things. It's not too complicated here either. You got your zoom in and out. Horn is spacebar. Yes, the vehicles do have horns on them. Third person, first person toggle with F4, free look is Z. A lot of these things are going to be very similar. You got flight systems ready R as well here. Mobi-glass is the same, that's not different. They have the options here for opening and closing doors, unlocking and locking doors. What I have found is when you have them set in the other options above for your ships, this isn't any different. It works here too. I don't think you have to separately put these on there. And then again, for some reason, it's got your map here and it's got your wipe helmet visor. So same idea with movement, very normal controls here. There's not anything complicated here. Drive forward, backward, left, right, brake, boost. Once again, locking, pitch, and yaw. Just unbind that one. You don't want that. And then this one I've never seen do anything. It says toggle braking on idle. I've never seen that actually work. So you can experiment with it, see if it works for you, but I've never seen it do anything. Spectator mode, don't mess with it, don't care. Social, general, the only things you're really going to need to know here is exiting seat button. Notification, accept and decline. So if someone shares a mission with you, it's going to pop up in the middle of your screen, and you're going to hit left bracket to accept, right bracket to decline that mission. Comlink app in your Mobi-glass has a shortcut of F11. You can turn on and off the chat window on the left-hand side of the screen with a key binding here. I have mine set on end, which is under my home button. You can hit enter to focus on the chat window, and you can hit tab to cycle which chat you're speaking in the chat window. So you can toggle between global and party, etc. Okay, same thing down here with social invites, left bracket, right bracket to accept or reject. Okay, social emotes, you just have shortcuts for various emotes if you'd like to set up key bindings for those. Okay, now down here in VoIP, FOIP, and head tracking, you have a few various different things here. I have enable head tracking toggle because I use the track IR. I have it set to one of my numpad keys so I can turn it on and off. Resetting your or recentering your head tracking device, I use a track IR, so I actually have a button within track IR that will recenter it for me. So I don't have to use the in-game recentering, which is why it says accept track IR. Other head tracking, like if you use the webcam head tracking, the built-in webcam head tracking, or maybe even a Tobii, you might need to set something here in order to recenter that head tracking as well. You can enable or disable head tracking for third-person camera. So if you don't want it to use head tracking when you go into third person, you can toggle that here. You can also go over to the options and just turn it off completely so that it's not always on, or you can have it so it's always on. But if you'd like a key binding to toggle it, there it is. Push to talk for voice in game. I have this set to one of my mouse buttons. Currently, VoIP is hit or miss whether it's working or not, but you can actually change it to proximity only versus talking in your party chat. And then you have face over IP selfie cam, and then recalibration for face over IP. The selfie cam is silly. If you hit numpad minus, you hold it down, it basically just has a camera that points at your face. All right, quick keys, interactions, and inner thought. Pretty simple. Your basic interaction key is going to be F all the time. Then you have your activating inner thought about left and right click. Focus is middle mouse button. Interaction mode, zoom in. These are all things if you're holding F. So inner thought and interactions is if you're holding down F, this is your inner thought interactions. So it's basically saying left click in order to do something like this. Retract landing gear. Now if you have an option here where it's got multiple dots on it, right clicking will bring up the wheel to do that. So left clicking will just exit, right clicking will bring up the mouse wheel so that you can do other actions there. And then with mouse wheel you can zoom in and out. There's a few MFD options here as well. Left Alt F will actually bring up this inner thought menu here, which you can do things such as bring up your mobi-glass, choose certain weapons. You have player, dismiss your corpse marker if you died recently. For some reason prone is in here. You can do your access your emote menu in here. Wipe your helmet visor. You can backspace yourself. So all of those different things are in here. If you're sitting in a ship seat as well, there will be ship actions here, so you can actually access toggling your ports on and off, opening your exterior doors, etc. will also be in that menu. All right, you do also have the ability to change your buttons for your inventory. So you can open up your main inventory or you can open up your looting inventory, either one. But these are all going to be like inventory shortcuts here, tab, I, etc., dropping your item as well. And then that's pretty much going to be mostly it for what you're going to do down here. And then down here is going to be advanced camera controls, which you can mess around if you'd like. You can actually save camera views if you want. The modifier basically means you hold down F4 in order to do these things. So if I were to hold down F4 and hit numpad 1, I would save the current camera view to numpad 1, and then I can actually hit numpad 1 in order to just go straight to that camera view or swap between camera views. So if you see people using a lot of really cool B-roll and different camera angles, there's certain Twitch streamers as well that have certain camera angles set up because they do a lot of RP. This is where they do that. So you can do all of that things. You can actually do different offsets for the camera. You can actually change and increase your FOV in the camera and depth of field as well. There's a lot of really cool cinematic things you can do with the camera in this game, but this is where all of those options are. All right, now that's going to be pretty much everything. If you have any questions, feel free to ask me in the comments below. If you like the video, like it, subscribe. We'll see you in the next one.